welcome one and all, Winter Wizard here, and in this video I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the new Index Death Guard. It's cold and lonely here in Winter Wizard's Frozen Fortress. We just made a nice cup of tea, Terran Gold of course, and we're joined as always by my comrade and co-host Norwegian Troll Dimmu, and we have been feeling inspired to share a few thoughts on the Index Death Guard, so let's jump into this. The Death Guard gleefully embrace all the fevers and agues of Nurgle, advancing inexorably to spread disease and carve their foes apart with poisoned fire and rusty blades. Few armies are as durable as the Death Guard. This corrupted legion has grown fat on Nurgle's blessings, mutated and swollen flesh bursting out of armour, the pus-filled excess sloughing off when struck by the enemy. They march to battle with flies buzzing around them, never relenting as they shrug off devastating salvos that would kill mere mortals. Alongside this acrid advance, bloated demon engines rumble forward, belching gouts of explosive fire. The Death Guard's approach is slow but inevitable, and their enemies fall choking under clouds of diseased smog. These are the words of Games Workshop themselves, written in the Death Guard faction focus that we saw on the upcoming release to the Index. And as a Death Guard player myself, having been so since the birth of 8th edition, many years now, having enjoyed the fruits of Nurgle's Garden upon the tabletop, I was undoubtedly extremely excited about the upcoming Index. Yet, while there is much in the Index that I think is very, very positive indeed, I sadly find myself to be overall disgustingly disappointed. So I was inspired to make a little video to share some thoughts about the Index and the overall approach to the Death Guard in 10th edition. Now, something I wanted to make very, very clear before we dive too far into this is that personally I'm not somebody who enjoys watching videos which have nothing to offer but negativity.
It's all fun and games until someone has to be the Nazis.
And while I enjoy a good moan and a rant as much as the next person, I am not a wizard who will sit here and pick apart a subject with nothing but disdain and negativity without offering anything positive in return, without offering some ideas, some thought, a counter proposal, if you like, of how I personally feel like this could be changed or improved to make the subject in question a more palatable, more enjoyable, more satisfactory one. With that in mind, as you could probably tell from the title of the video, there will be a fair bit of negativity about the Index. So I am going to go through the Index, I'm going to share my thoughts along the way, and then at the end I am going to go back and offer my suggestions on what I would have preferred to have seen. So now with those caveats firmly in place, let's take a look at Index Death Guard. First of all, we've got the Death Guard Army Rule, Nurgle's Gift, which is the aura of -1 to the toughness characteristic of enemy models within Contagion range. Contagion range progresses from battle rounds 1, 2, 3 and onwards, starting at 3 inches, then 6 inches, then 9 inches. This is a fantastic rule. This is a perfect, wonderful representation of the sickness and blight that the Death Guard bring to the battlefield, affecting all in their presence. You read the books, you listen to the audiobooks, the lore of the Death Guard, just to be in their presence is crippling. I find this rendition of the rule to be much cleaner and crisper than the 9th edition rendition. Before it used to be battle round 1 was like 1 inches, then it was 3, then 6, then 9, so this is much nicer. A lot of the progressive auras that we are seeing in the game seem to happen between battle rounds 1, 2 and 3, so it's nice that this has now been brought in line with that. I have seen A lot of people complaining that this is just nowhere near as good in 10th edition because the toughness chart being stretched, especially for things like vehicles, monsters, the really big, tough, chunky stuff. To that, so what? Really, it's still a great rule. It's going to be very, 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 very obnoxious on light infantry, even medium infantry and elite infantry. I still think it's a fantastic rule. Games Workshop maybe could have considered having an addition to this where if your unit's toughness at base is 12 or more, then perhaps you'll get -2 to your toughness. That could have knocked vehicles down a little bit, but to be honest, I don't really think it's necessary. Vehicles are vehicles, let them be tough. Moving on to the Death Guard detachment rules, spread the sickness, and we find ourselves at our first drop of disappointment. Now, before we get too carried away here, Death Guard units get sticky objectives, so when they move away from an objective, it's still theirs, even if there's no units there. And as well as that, objectives under Death Guard control get the contagion range as well. Both of these rules I really like. I really like that. Death Guard are slow and remorseless, so the idea that they have the sticky objectives is quite nice to compensate for that. Not that I feel like everything needs to be compensated for, because armies should have a weakness, but I think it plays in nicely with the contagion range stuff, and especially the idea of objective markers getting contaminated as well, I think is really, really fun, really thematic, and really nice. Maybe it doesn't come up that often in games, but if you're behind an objective about 3 inches and then on the exact opposite side of that objective you've got a unit that's just out of your contagion range, but it's now in range of the objective contagion range, you know, it's going to play in a little bit. And the idea that you can leave an objective and it will still be contaminated, the enemy has to actually recapture that objective to cleanse Nurgle's Garden. So I really like that, but I do find myself being a little bit disappointed because there's the glaring question of where is disgustingly resilient? To which you will say, Winter Wizard, what are you talking about? Disgusting Resilient is here. It's here in the Stratagems. So, the Stratagems. Let's take a look at the Stratagems. The Stratagems, I do like the Stratagems. I like the fact that they reward you for holding the objectives and being within contagion range. I'm seeing a lot of the Stratagems proposed in the indexes that are encouraging armies to play into their army rule. What I like about it is the fact that the stratagem gives you something, but gives you a little something extra if you're playing into that. So, for example, Ferric Blight here is giving us a bonus to our AP, but if the target is within contagion range of an infected objective marker, we're getting a little extra something as well. We're getting extra AP on the critical wounds. So I quite like that. That's nice. It's a little strange that Boil Blight doesn't follow the exact same parameters as the other two sort of aggressive ones. You don't have to be within range of a objective that's in contagion range. You just have to be in contagion range. Little subtle differences like this, although perhaps they don't make the greatest effect in the grand scheme of things, they do really irk me. I do find them very, very irritating and annoying. To me, they feel very untidy. They feel sloppy and unpolished. For example, let's take a look. If we took a look at the Necron's index, and we see that every single one of their stratagems, you gain something, but if a character is leading the unit, then you get something else, and it's always the same. If a character is leading the unit, you get a little extra something here. So it would have been really nice to see that level of cleanliness and continuity here in the Death Guard stratagems. So we get a bonus, we get a little something, and then we get a little something more if the enemy is within contagion range of an infected objective, full stop. So they all work that way, if it makes sense for them to do so. So that's a little bit annoying. Really glad to see Cloud of Flies back. But let's talk about Disgustingly Resilient. So Disgustingly Resilient costs 2 CP. It's for the fight phase only, and it reduces all damage by 1. So hello, welcome back, Disgustingly Resilient.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
This is miserably disappointing to me. 2 CP is pretty expensive for just getting your classic faction rule back in some form. The fact that it's fight phase only is weird. Like, why are they only disgusting and resilient in the fight phase and not under enemy firepower? And again, perhaps you'll say, Winter Wizard, yes, but it's really good though, because you subtract 1 from the damage and it doesn't say that that's capped to a minimum of 1. So I could be attacked by somebody and with a flurry of really high AP damage 1 attacks, and I could play this stratagem for 2 CP and it says, no thank you, you're not going to be giving me any damage whatsoever. I wouldn't like that at all, quite frankly. I think that's kind of pretty lazy game design. The fact that you could just, well, an enemy unit is just lined up to attack you and you could just spend 2 CP to say, no, you don't get to do anything whatsoever. I don't find that very fun at all. That's very uninteractive. It's pretty demoralizing and pretty frustrating and pretty anticlimactic, quite frankly. For both players, I don't think that's particularly very fun at all. Subtracting damage, I think, should be limited to damage 1. Subtract 1 from the damage to a minimum of 1. Future Winter Wizard here, going through editing the video today. GW did actually release the points values, and alongside this they released their document about game design, and within said document they did in fact clarify that all damage when being reduced is to a minimum of 1. You cannot reduce the damage of something below a 1. So I'm actually really pleased to see that that is the case, but I felt like keeping the little rant in here anyway, just to share my thoughts on why I'm actually very, very pleased that they have done this. Moving on. If they really needed to put Disgustingly Resilient here in this form and give it life this way, I would love it to have just been reduce all damage by 1 to a minimum of 1 when fight phase, shooting phase, whichever, 1 CP. 1 CP to use your power play, and you'll probably be wanting to do that every turn, and that's where the Death Guard are going to start feeling resilient again. But to be honest with you, this is not how I would have wanted Disgustingly Resilient to be. I would not have wanted it to be in stratagem form, full stop. Future Winter Wizard here again. So the other day I had a lovely little Vox call with the Major, my dear brother, my own flesh and blood. The Major himself has actually just put together a very, very beautiful Custodes themed army inspired by the Army of the Dead from the Lord of the Rings franchise. Now, we were having a lovely cozy little chat about rules and stratagems, etc, etc, and he told me that the Custodes Index has a very nice stratagem called Arcane Genetic Alchemy, and that this basically works in the exact same way that the Death Guard Disgustingly Resilient stratagem works. However, it's for both the shooting phase or the fight phase.
Wankers!
So it's the exact same stratagem, it costs 2 CP, the wording is exactly the same, apart from the fact that they're allowed to use it, the Custodes are allowed to use it in the shooting phase or the fight phase, whereas the Death Guard can only use it in the fight phase. So, if this, surely this can only be a typing error on GW's part. Surely they need to add back in the words shooting phase or in the Death Guard stratagem, so shooting phase or fight phase. Surely that's what it's supposed to be, considering that they've got the exact same stratagem in a different army worded ever so slightly differently. So, for example, we've seen in the Space Marine Loyalist chapters, Armour of Content is copy and pasted from the Gladius Task Force over into the Space Wolves detachment. So we've got the same stratagem, the same rule, the same concept being used in a different place. And that's really cool. It's nice that they've got like a catalogue of rules that they know work well, that they can then copy and paste into different factions. So why on earth is this Death Guard stratagem, Disgustingly Resilient, limited to only the fight phase when the Custodies have the exact same thing for the shooting and or the fight phase? Surely this has to be a mistake, because if it's not a mistake and this is done on purpose, then I find that absolutely infuriating. Not just because of the fact that I love my Death Guard and I want them to be disgusting and I want them to be resilient, but from a game design point, these tiny subtle little tweaks was one of the plagues of 9th edition. The same rule repeated in different places but worded ever so slightly differently, just to give this army just a little bit more of an advantage because reasons. So I really hope that this is just a mistake and that they are going to change it, because otherwise that is going to make me one very grumpy wizard. Anyway, back to the video. The enhancements are fine. They're pretty fun, nice and thematic. No complaints there. So moving on to the data sheets, I'm not going to be going through every single one of these in detail. This video is just to highlight a few thoughts. So I want to kick it off with a little bit of positivity. So let's have a little look at Typhus. Really loving what they've done with Typhus. Typhus is looking like an absolute weapon. Really enjoy his special ability. The Eater Plague is great fun. Seems like Perils of the Warp is still somewhat a thing. He does have a chance to blow his own head up a little bit, which is always nice. The Destroyer Hive, also very, very nice indeed. Nice utility there. But he's also looking pretty tanky. Toughness 6, maybe would have liked to have seen that be Toughness 7 just because it's Nurgle, but hey ho. What I also really love about Typhus is the fact that he can lead a bunch of Poxwalkers, so I'm really glad that they've kept that there. He is the harbinger. After all, he's famed for the plague zombies, so it would have been a crying shame if he wasn't able to lead a bunch of Poxwalkers. Lord of Virulence here, one of my absolute favourite characters. Love what they've done here. Master of Destruction ability is very nice, but I do have an issue with it. We'll get to that in a little bit. Blight Bombardment is also very, very nice. It's going to be very, very nice for the Plague Burst Crawlers, like what they've done there. Like in the fact that plague weapons seem to be getting lethal hits now. That seems to be plague weapons, but if they auto hit, such as the plague spewers, plague spitters, they seem to be getting anti-infantry 2+. Very, very naughty. So let's talk about Master of Destruction quickly. We've got this model, when it's leading a unit and they perform a ranged attack, you can re-roll the wound roll. Very, very spicy. Very aggressive, very, very nice indeed. So, who can this model lead? This model can be attached to the following units: a Blight Lord Terminator and a Death Shroud Terminator. So, rerolling all your wounds on the Blight Lords is going to be pretty tasty, I assume. So, why don't we have a look at those next? Blight Lord Terminators looking very, very chonky indeed with their 2-up saves and toughness 6, but there is a glaring issue that we have with their toughness. It's the fact that they don't have no feel, no pain. We're going to get onto that in a little bit. But for now, let's think about what we just said with the Lord of Virulence, rerolling all wounds. He can join either a Death Shroud or a Blight Lord units. But, however, we as Blight Lords have an ability ourselves, and that is Blistering Fusillade. Each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack, if it targets the closest eligible enemy unit, reroll a wound roll of 1. So we could reroll a wound roll of 1 if it's the closest enemy unit. If we've got a Lord of Virulence with us, then we can reroll everything. This I find very, very disappointing and very, very frustrating, quite frankly, and to be honest, kind of sloppy rules design. It's nice to be able to re-roll wound rolls of 1. Yeah, that's very nice for the closest enemy unit. It's a good rule. It really is. It is a good rule. It's nice. I'm not really sure what exactly about it screams Blight Lord Terminators, though. When I think of Blight Lord Terminators and all the potential rules that they could be attached to, all the abilities that they could potentially have, this is really not one that I was particularly thinking about. Blistering Fusillade sounds like it'd be perfect for something like Centurions or Aggressors in the Space Marines army. But a little bit confused as to why they decided to go with this for the Blight Lords. But it is a good rule. However, it just becomes what I don't like about the fact is that, well, I really want to play with a Lord of Virulence, and to me it makes sense that he would be hanging around with a bunch of Blight Lords. But if I do that, then it makes the ability on the Blight Lord's datasheet that you're essentially paying for redundant. It completely replaces that rule because I'm now rerolling all of my wounds. So why do I care about rerolling ones for the closest enemy unit? I now have a rule and ability on my datasheet that has become absolutely redundant because I put a character in it, a character that I can actually only attach to 2 different units, this being one of them.
Fucking embarrassing. Waste of our time. Fucking waste of our time.
So that I find very, very confusing, very, very upsetting. And as I said, this to me seems like quite an oversight and a rule synergy that has just not really been thought out. Then again, we could put him alongside a unit of Death Shroud Terminators. Death Shroud really like what they've done here, apart from one small thing, which is the Plague Spurt Gauntlet. All the other sort of Plague Flamer weapons have been given anti-infantry 2+, however these ones have just got anti 4+. It's probably for the best, because if the Lord of Virulence did go with them, it would make his rule sort of pointless, I guess. I mean, you'd still be rerolling your wound rolls of 1, but I guess you'd be rerolling them against, rerolling all of those against other things that aren't infantry. But still, it's just almost like synergies that just sort of don't really mix with each other too well. Either they make something redundant, or it's almost like a little bit of an anti-synergy. Yeah, so a little bit strange. But other than that, the Death Shroud Terminators, very, very nice, very, very naughty, like what they've done here. Perhaps the Lord of Virulence's Master of Destruction ability could have been a +1 to wound instead. That would have worked just a little bit better, crossing over with the Blight Lords and the Death Shroud. So maybe that could have been an option. So for the rest of the Bubotic Astartes, let's take a little look at the Plague Marines. Plague Marines, like what they've done here, it all makes sense to me. Toughness 5, definitely. Objective Control 2. Oh, I didn't mention that the Blight Lords and the Death Shroud have gone down to Movement 4. Movement 4, Plague Marines, Movement 5. I think that's fair enough. Again, armies do need weaknesses. You shouldn't be good at everything. Unless you're somebody like Space Marines. But Space Marines should be generally good at most things, but specialists at none. Most armies, I think, should not be good at everything. They should be specialist at something, maybe, and poorer at other things. So making the Death Guard slow, I think, is a positive thing. Anyway, Plague Marines, again, like what they've done here. Really like what they've done with all the ranged weapons and the melee weapons, simplifying the bubotic weapons, or the heavy plague weapons is quite nice. Definitely like what they've done there. There was a huge amount of individual stuff in the kit, and you get so many different specialist weapons. So it's nice that they've condensed it down a little bit without taking it too far to the extreme. They've got an ability as well, Remorseless, and again, it's the same story with the Blight Lords. Remorseless, while this unit is within range of an objective marker you control, each time you take a battle shock test for this unit, add 1 to that test. Yeah, it's a good rule. It's a good rule. Why is it on Plague Marines? Again, there's nothing really particular about that rule that makes me, that screams to me, this belongs on a Plague Marine unit. Again, of all the rules they could have picked, I'm curious as to why they went for this one. I do have a suggestion as a rule that I would have replaced this with, the one that but I will get onto that in a little bit when I go back and do my sort of overall musings on what I would have liked to have seen with this codex, with this index. You're probably going to want some Plague Marines in your army, because all your voted Virion units, those are your elite characters, they can only join Plague Marines, which I don't necessarily love. I would have liked my voted Virion to be able to maybe tag along with some Terminators, but they seem to be under the attitude that armor should stay with matching armor. So anyway, let's take a little look through the Photovirion. Noxious Blightbringer, really fun. Really like what he does. He goes back to sort of 8th edition rules here, where he's getting your advance and charge rolls better, and he's hurting enemy units' leadership, subtracting it by 2. That's pretty nice. Yes, I really like the Blightbringer. The good old Foul Blight Spawn, he's got the Putrefying Stink now, which is the Fight's first ability. Nice to see that he still has that in some form, and he's obviously still got his Plague Sprayer of Death, and this one's got the Anti-Infantry 2+, ignores Current Torrent. Lovely weapon, yeah. Blight Spawn's still great. Biologus Putrefier, I really like what they've done here. They've kept his sort of grenade theme alive. He's got his Hyper Blight grenades as his ranged weapons. He can dip into the grenade stratagem for 0 CP. That's really fun. That's really nice. Foul Infusion for criticals on 5. Will be some nice synergies going on, no doubt. Tallyman seems to be basically the same as he was in 9th. Still gets to basically tally a unit with his malicious calculations, giving them +1 to hit. Yep. Very nice, and a 7-fold chance for a 7-up to gain some CP. Yep, Tallyman, still great. Plague Surgeon is an ever so slightly different story. I'm really glad to see that you can actually pick models back up now, like an Apothecary. 3 editions has taken them to make him act like an Apothecary, and now he does. Diseased Healing, I'm a little bit underwhelmed by. It's a shame that it's specific only to characters. It would have been nice for it to just be anybody, really. But never mind. Cultists are cultists. Really nice to see that they've got Nurgle's Gift now, so that they can assist with the Contagion range auras. Arguably the biggest winners of the index, however, are the humble Poxwalkers. My favourite unit always have been my wonderful, beautiful flesh bags. How I love you so. So pleased to see that they've still got their toughness 4. They are slow as ever with movement 4, but fine, that's cool. They've got the Feel No Pain 5-up. They've got the 8th edition Disgustingly Resilient back. We're going to be having a little chat about that in a bit, but it's really nice to see that they've still got some sort of Feel No Pain. Did not expect it to be a 5-up. I was expecting it to be a 6, like in 9th edition. But also, Curse of the Walking Pox. They still kill things, and they rise again to join the ranks of the dead. So pleased to see that they've still got that. They seem to have lost none of their flavour. A little bit of a shame about the Leadership 8+, and nothing to sort of compensate for that. They've always been mindless. They've always been ignoring leadership tests, things like that. So maybe they could have had a little rule just to compensate for that, maybe like a re-roll on Battleshock tests, but never mind. I do really enjoy the fact that no army seems to be immune to Battleshock. Makes it an actually meaningful mechanic, as opposed to what the morale mechanics used to always be. One other little thing, actually, with the Curse of the Walking Pox, really cool to see that Typhus's Eater Plague ability will actually count towards resurrecting Poxwalkers. So that's very nice indeed. Top marks for the Poxwalker datasheet. Then we start getting into many other datasheets that you'll find in amongst the different flavours of chaos. We've got the Chaos Spawn, we've got the Hell Brutes, the Rhinos, the Predators, the Land Raiders, the Defiler, and while they've all got a little bit of a Nurgle flair to them, because they can take the, because they'll be contributing to Nurgle's gifts, that none of them are any different really to the same units in the other Flavors of Chaos. Now, they might have some slightly different special rules involved. For example, the Death Guard Hellbrute has infused with the blessings of Nurgle, while the one from the Thousand Suns, as each one has a very different kind of buff. But it really disappoints me to see that they are exactly the same toughness as these units would be in any other Legion of Chaos, and it's just not the way it should be. It's Death Guard. Yes, they have contagions. Yes, they're making things sick. Yes, they're revolting to be around, but they still should be tougher than their equivalents in other legions. This is what the Death Guard are. This is what they do. So for me, this is a massive negative, because my Death Guard don't feel tougher than the equivalents in other legions. Now, saying that, when we discuss what I would have preferred to have seen with this index, I am going to be talking about that later, but I don't actually necessarily think that the Land Raiders, the Predators, the Rhinos should have a higher toughness stat than their counterparts. But in this particular case, in this particular index, with this set of rules, I do. Or the Death Guard specific vehicles, however, the Photic Bloat Drone, Mephitic Blight Hauler, Plagueburst Crawler, really like what they've done with all the rules, all the special abilities that they've got here. I think they've really nailed that. I'm a little bit concerned that they're just not tough enough. I was a little bit surprised to see a Plagueburst Crawler as only toughness 10, which is the same as a Predator. I find this really surprising. The Plagueburst Crawler has always been an absolute monstrous immovable object, an absolute armoured shell of toughness. So I was really surprised to see it only hit toughness 10. Perhaps it's just the case that Games Workshop are trying to bring the Plagueburst Crawler more in line with the other Death Guard specific vehicles, the Mephitic Blight Haulers, the Photic Bloat Drones. Perhaps they want to leave the toughest sort of tank as the Land Raider. Now, I just want to quickly address the fact that I did say the Plagueburst Crawler has always been such and such. I must say that I am finding it kind of irritating when I'm seeing people continuously talking about the fact that units are being nerfed, or even units are being buffed. I don't feel like units. I don't feel like it's fair to call it that. The unit has not been buffed. The weapon has not been nerfed. This is a whole new edition now. It's a whole new battlefield. It's a whole new world. Don't you dare close your eyes. Moving on to the Death Lord and the Pale King himself. Much prefer what they've done with these epic characters. Now, instead of having 4 continuous warlord traits all the time, which was just such bloat and so annoying, he's got the Host of Plagues, so he can choose one of the following 3 at the start of the battle round. So much better. Really like what they've done here. Really like this approach. Mortarion is still Mortarion, and he's better for it. So with all that being said, and while there is much to like here, much positivity within the index, I do overall find myself still to be disgustingly disappointed. I will be perfectly honest here, I haven't played any games with the Death Guard using the new rules, using the 10th index. I haven't put them up, I haven't tested them on the field of battle, but at face value I find that the index, for me personally, doesn't really give me the full flavour of what I expect the Death Guard to be. While there are small increases in toughness in comparison to your standard Marines, many of the units are still exactly the same toughness as their equivalent in other legions or their loyalist counterparts. The Land Raiders, the Rhinos, the Predators being a prime example of this point. And you could say that, well, maybe they'll points cost them, so that non-Death Guard equivalents are more expensive, and therefore point per point they become tougher. But I find that to be just such a lazy and if somewhat moronic way to do that. You should be representing the toughness of this thing using its rules, using its core stats, not modifying it with points because you feel like you made a boo-boo. While this will be impactful and make a difference for a lot of weapons out there, it won't make a difference or be impactful for all weapons all the time. A Space Marine pointing his bolt gun at a Khorne Berserker or a Plague Marine, it will make a difference. He'll be wounding the Berserker on a 4 and the Plague Marine on a 5. There's a difference there. But a Guardsman pointing his las gun at the two same targets, he'll be wounding them both on 5s. No difference there. Then again, a Space Marine pointing his bolt gun at a Black Legion Terminator or a Blight Lord Terminator, he'll be wounding the Black Legion on a 5 and the Blight Lord on a 5. But again, we take the Guardsman pointing his las gun at the same two targets. He'll be wounding Black Legion Terminator on a 5 and the Blight Lord on a 6. So maybe it will all come out in the wash. Maybe over the grand course of the game it won't make too much difference. But it does irk me slightly that there are weapons where it's really not going to make a difference at all. And I feel like the further we explore the full range of weaponry, that the many armies that we'll get, you might just get those matchups where the enemy's weapons are just not really going to care whether you're toughness 5 or 6 or toughness 4 or 5. And at that point, Death Guard stop doing what Death Guard are supposed to do. They stop being tough. Now, all of that is a little bit of sort of loose speculation. I haven't done any maths. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not really a math hammer kind of person. It's more of a gut feeling there. But I still feel like in order to guarantee Death Guard feeling like Death Guard, you need an overall mechanic that's going to affect all things all the time. And I'm not convinced that the 9th edition mechanic of reducing all damage by 1 is going to be satisfactory enough. It affects different weapons too differently. A damage 2 weapon suddenly has its damage capped by 50%, whereas a damage 4 weapon would only have its damage capped by 25%. There is an inconsistency there that doesn't feel like a fair decrease weapon per weapon. And of course your damage 1 weapons aren't affected in the slightest. So it was because of these reasons that it seemed blindingly obvious to me that in 10th edition we'd be seeing a feel no pain mechanic thrown out across the Death Guard range once again. Whether or not that would be the 5-up feel no pain that we had in 8th edition, or what I thought was probably more likely would be an army-wide 6-up feel no pain. Alas, we got neither of those.
Alas. Earwax.
And I feel like this is such a crying shame and such a disappointing aspect of this new index. There were no army-wide feel no pain. But perhaps you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, Winter Wizard, we can get a feel no pain. We can do that with a Death Guard Demon Prince on foot. But to put it bluntly, I personally would say that this is a pathetic compromise and that it's something of a desperate attempt to sellotape together a bleeding wound. Imagine if we was playing Necrons and they took away the Necron's ability to reanimate in any form whatsoever. The reanimation protocols mechanic was gone, so your Necrons no longer get to reanimate. This flies against everything that we know about Necrons in the lore and how they operate. To have no representation of this, or just to have an unimpressively paltry excuse for to crowbar this mechanic back into the Force. For example, let's say I'm only allowed to use my reanimation protocols if I've got a Overlord on the table and it's only the units within 6 inches of him that can do it anyway. Why do I feel like there needs to be a restriction or an obligation or a tax on a rule that just makes my army do what it should? So how do I personally feel like GW should have approached Index Death Guard? How should they have created that relenting shrugging of devastating salvos? How should they have created the slow, remorseless advance, the inevitable doom of the impending Death Guard tide? How should they have done that? Let me talk about that now. So let's go back to the Death Guard army rule, and quite simply, in my opinion, this should have just been Death Guard army rule, disgustingly resilient. And let's go full hog here and just let's give them the 5-up, feel no pain back. So Death Guard army rule, disgustingly resilient, all units in your army get a 5-up, feel no pain. And so what about the detachment rule? Well, this is what I would have made as Nurgle's Gift. So Death Guard Plague Company, detachment rule, Nurgle's Gift. And this is where we get our contagion range. And I would have kept that exactly as they've written it here. However, I would have folded into this rule itself the fact that objectives will also become contagious once they've been controlled by the Death Guard. So all units and objectives under your control gain Nurgle's Gift. They gain the aura of -1 to toughness for enemy units. So from here we're going to lose our sticky objectives. However, we are actually going to bring that back in a different form, because I do think that is actually really good. And I do think that's very positive for the Death Guard. As a very slow army, this rule allows you to bring forth the narrative of them being slow yet remorseless. So we're going to go back to our Blightlord Terminator datasheet, and we're going to go back to our Plague Marine datasheet, and we're going to remove those two abilities that they have on there. So the Blistering Fusillade for the Blightlord Terminators, gone, and the Plague Marines Remorseless ability, gone as well. Both good rules, both nice, not really sure why they have to be specific to Blightlords or Plague Marines. So we're going to replace those two rules now with sticky objectives. So Plague Marines and Blightlords both get sticky objectives. And what are we going to call this rule? Obviously, Inexorable Advance. So that's your Plague Marines and your Blightlords now with the Inexorable Advance sticky objectives. We've got our sticky objectives again. So this is a nice way, I think, to create synergy with your detachment rule, because now we can see the layers forming here. Our detachment rule tells us that objectives we control, as well as all our own units, have Nurgle's Gift, contagion range. So our objectives are reducing people's minus toughness as well. And this will fold nicely into the Blightlords and the Plague Marines having Inexorable Advance, the sticky objectives rule. So there's a nice bit of synergy here that you can look for and that you can play with. The Blightlords aren't going to miss their Blistering Fusillade rule, because we can team up with the Lord of Virulence, who's going to give us rerolls of all wounds. We can also team up with somebody like a Lord of Contagion as well. Now, we could have thought about giving Inexorable Advance to things like the Poxwalkers or the Death Shroud as well, but I think it's quite nice to just leave it to the Plague Marines, leave it to the Blightlords, encourage people to want to take those as your basic foot slogging troop choices. So now that we've altered the Death Guard army rule back to the good old disgustingly resilient 5-up, we've increased the toughness of all data sheets equally, regardless of what weapons firing at them all the time. We don't need to alter the toughness of our Land Raiders, of our Predators, of our Hellbrutes to make them feel actually like Death Guard, as opposed to World Eaters or Ultramarines or whatever. We've now fixed the detachment rule. We folded in the objective contamination with that, which I think is like a nice little touch. And we could play off of that by giving our basic battle line units, like our Marines, like our Blight Lords, the favoured inexorable advance, so the sticky objectives. I feel like this is a much cleaner, much more simplified, much more elegant way to represent the Death Guard on the field of battle. We do still have our disgustingly resilient stratagem to think about. So what I would do with this is, well, we can't call it disgustingly resilient because that's now our army rule. So let's go back to the old warlord traits that we used to know. Revoltingly resilient. So we can have our stratagem as revoltingly resilient, and this can be our reduced damage by 1 to a minimum of 1. Shooting phase or fight phase, because Death Guard are resilient in both phases, of course they are. Reduce all damage by 1 to a minimum of 1. Revoltingly resilient. Other little minor things that I would have tweaked, I would have perhaps tweaked the Plague Surgeon's healing rule to be just a unit instead of specifically a character. I find that a little bit annoying. The Death Shroud Flamers, the Plague Spurt Gauntlets, I would have given them the same anti-infantry 2+ that they've given to every other Plague Flamer equivalent out there. Although actually I've just noticed that the Plague Marines Plague Belcher, I think it is, also only has anti-infantry 4+. And again, this is another one of those minor differences that just feels really kind of infuriating, kind of untidy, unkept, unclean, unpolished. I feel like it just would have been so much better, so much smoother, just to have all the Plague Flamer style weapons, as there is quite a lot of them, to all have the same anti-infantry 2+, and then the rest of the stats on the weapon is all different depending on which one you have. They vary from varieties of strength and AP, but now you also have to remember that 2 of them out of the bunch, their anti-infantry is only a 4 instead of a 2, so that's, again, really annoying. And something I just can't help but feel is sloppy writing. Moving on, so now that we've given our army its rightful, disgustingly resilient 5-up Feel No Pain back, we're going to need to give our Demon Prince on foot a different buff, so we can no longer have the aura of Feel No Pain. So for me, I would give him an aura of cover, so anybody within contagion range of him gets the benefit of cover. There's flies and swarms of insects and smog of foul stink morphing around him, and so he can give all units around him the benefits of cover. So I'd give him something like that. Couple of other final thoughts about handing out disgustingly resilient is that people say that it would slow the game down a lot, but as a Death Guard player myself, from 8th edition, having played lots of games, rolling lots of dice, I really don't feel like it does actually slow the game down that much, and you certainly do get a bit of a routine speed on when you're making those disgustingly resilient rolls. And perhaps you're also thinking, well, maybe GW just don't want to hand out something as powerful as an army-wide Feel No Pain. But they've already demonstrated that they are happy to do that. They've given Knights a Feel No Pain army-wide. Now, before you start hammering at the keyboard and telling me that Knights should be tough, yes, I totally agree. Knights should be really, really tough. They should be the toughest army overall. I really do believe that. I think Custodes should also be very, very tough, perhaps arguably on average tougher across the table than the Death Guard, but I think both of these should be toughnesses in a different way. Knights, I feel like, should have lots of just really high, obviously lots of really high toughness, really good saves, invuln saves. I really would have actually liked to have seen, instead of their Feel No Pain ability, I really would have liked to see Knights have quite a nice, clever mechanic utilizing ion shields, perhaps once per turn. They can turn a failed save, they can turn the damage of that weapon to 0 or something like that. And I know I touched on the fact that it's not fun to turn a unit's damages all the way down to 0, but being able to do this for 1 dice roll per phase, per night perhaps, could have been quite fun, would offer a little bit of thought, a little bit of push your luck elements, like when does the player decide when to use their ion shield. Again, that's just off the top of my head, but using something like an ion shield mechanic would have been really nice to sort of represent the toughness of knights, rather than just a feel no pain for them. And custodians as well, they should just be really, really tough. Lots of wounds, really high armor. Just each single model should be an absolute fortress in himself. So I really feel like, and they have the mechanic of feel no pains against mortal wounds. So it's a little bit more specialist there, but overall their raw stats are really tough, and I think that's how it should be. Custodians and knights should both be tougher than the Death Guard on average overall, but it should be represented in a much different way. So for the Death Guard, disgustingly resilient, 5-up feel no pain. I think something like a feel no pain really plays into the sort of more chaotic, unnatural element of the toughness of the Death Guard, though. Like, it is much more random, and you don't know when your shots land if it's really gonna actually do anything serious, or if it's just gonna puncture a big wad of fat, or pustulence or plague or whatever it is. I really do feel like a feel no pain really, really perfectly represents the chaotic, unnatural resilience that the Death Guard brings. So those are my thoughts. That's how I personally would fix the Index Death Guard. If you have your own ideas, if you disagree with anything that I've said, please put that down in the comment section. We'll have a nice little discussion about it down there. It would be really great to hear some other opinions from Death Guard players, or people who have just had a lot of experience playing Death Guard, and anything in between. At the end of the day, these are all just the opinions of one grumpy wizard, but if I was the head of the rules writing team responsible for Index Death Guard, and little Jimmy Jenkins, the intern, had presented me with this as his work, I dare say that I would feel just as I do right now, disgustingly disappointed.
Jeez, that's disappointing. No, not that.
So once again, whoever you are, thank you ever so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed the video, if you enjoy my work, then a like and a comment would be very, very much appreciated. And if you would like to see more of what goes on here inside the Frozen Fortress, then perhaps you'll also consider becoming a subscriber. I'm Winter Wizard, that's Dimmu, and for now, keep it frosty.